Hello, I'm Padmaja Sarathy. I'm absolutely delighted to be interviewing Lakshmi Parameswaran on behalf of the Foundation for India Studies, Houston, for the Indo-American Oral History Project, in partnership with the Houston Public Library and the Houston Community College System. First of all, Lakshmi, let me ask you about your early childhood years in India and about your schooling and all that. Let's begin with that.
Okay, thank you very much, Padmaja, and I thank Mr. Vavilala for including us in this very important interview. I'm very glad that we are preserving some of our first generation immigrants' experience through this format. What can I say? I am originally from Kerala. We are Kerala Tamilians.
So your mother tongue is Tamil?
Yes, my mother tongue is, so is my husband. We are both Kerala Tamilians, even though he never lived in Kerala. And my husband, Dr. Parameswaran, who was interviewed just a few minutes ago by you. We are both from Kerala. I grew up and I studied in Kerala. My father was a professor, economics professor. I studied in Malayalam because naturally Kerala, the language in Kerala is Malayalam. They had Tamil medium in certain high school and all, but not middle school. So I ended up studying Malayalam. But my father also drilled in us a passion for English language.
Oh.
He was a professor. He loved the language, and he wanted us to not to confine ourselves to Tamil and Malayalam and Hindi, which also I studied. I cannot speak or anything, but I have studied Hindi. So he would teach us grammar, sentence structure, and things like that. So probably it's because of him that I developed an interest in English language and ended up getting a degree in English language and literature. And
I have had the pleasure of reading some of your articles, and they are beautifully written.
Thank you.
Now I know where it comes from.
Thank you. I think I have to give him the credit, yes. After I got married, I moved to Chennai to my husband's house in Nungapakam in Chennai. I was quite young. I got married in 1968. I lived in Chennai for 4 years, and during that time I had 2 kids. And then we moved to Michigan, like he said, to Detroit, Michigan in 1973. And he got a job at Wayne State, as you heard. He didn't even apply for that job. That is how the situation was in this country at the time, that there was a big shortage of professionals, doctors and engineers, that you were getting jobs without even applying. And his boss, as you heard, came to the airport to pick him up. So he came in 1973 January, and then I came later on in April. So in essence, what happened was that it was the first time I'm coming out, of my comfort zone as a young mother.
Tell me about that initial shock or experience settling in the U.S., coming from India, and you were still very young.
I was very
young. 2
young.
young children.
I was 24 years old. I had 2 young children, 3 and 1, and I was responsible for them because my husband worked very hard from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and all of a sudden I'm thrown into this new strange world, responsible for the children and for myself and for running a home. And luckily, looking back, I would say that I was so ignorant and so naive, and that helped me. It was a bliss that I didn't know what kind of a, what kind of a situation that I was thrown into. It was downtown Detroit, and it was notorious even then in the early 90s, 70s. There were a lot of drug problems and murders and all that was going on. And I would happily walk with my children through the streets of Detroit to go to the grocery store and buy groceries and take them to park and things like that. And that was my education. And I had to deal with building managers and neighbors and supervisor and all of that, and little problems that would come up in my apartment. For example, we had a supervisor in that building where we stayed in Detroit that the funny thing was that I thought everybody had an accent, okay? I thought no one in the United States spoke proper English. And I wrote that to my father. They have an accent. They don't I cannot understand them. And of course, they thought I had an accent. They couldn't understand me. So I had a tough time with that supervisor because, number one, my children were trained at 3 and 1 years of age because they were born in India. Their infancy was in India. They were potty trained completely. That was our system, right? And here, this supervisor would look at me and say, your children don't have diapers. What if they have an accident? She was worried about keeping the place so neat that I would let them run around in the hallway. She was always after me about not having diaper, and I tried to explain to her they are trained. I only put on diaper if we are on a long trip, especially to my younger one, not to the older one. We are on long trips or something like that. So that was my thing, my God, what is the problem here? So I learned. I grew up emotionally, physically, psychologically, all my growing up as to who I am, what my thoughts are, and what my opinions are. All of that happened in this country. So I would say that this country has contributed as to who I became today, even though the foundation probably was laid in India.
That's right. Your strength came from your sense of security, from your culture and background.
I'm sure it was. Otherwise, I would have been scared to death. I was not. There were situations that, even operating a coin laundry and things like that. A lot of my friends would wait for their husbands to come home because there were a good group of Indians in that building. It was provided to us by the hospital, by Wayne State University, and it was only for doctors and nurses. And they would say, we don't know how to operate these coin laundries. We are going to wait till 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock till our husbands came home. And I thought, I cannot with 2 kids. They didn't have children, even though we were all almost the same age. I was probably one of the very few with 2 kids that I would say, I cannot wait. I need clothes and sheets and towels for my kids. So I would just go out and mess with it and learn. So all of that in a way was good, that I had to deal with the world on my own terms with all kinds of people, Anglo-Americans, whites and African Americans and other immigrants. We had a lot of people from all over Asia, Japanese, Koreans, South Asians, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. It was a, it was a mini United Nation, I would say, that building. And I'm glad to have that opportunity to mingle with such people and find out who I am, and then how I should express myself and to navigate the world through this experience.
In other words, it strengthened you for what is to come later and for your laying the foundation for all the contribution that you have made over the years.
Thank you. Whatever I did, like all of us immigrants who came in the late 60s and early 70s, we all worked very, very hard. And we have all, thankfully contributed quite well personally and professionally and to the community. And I'm just one among them. And whatever I did, I'm very glad to have the opportunity. For example, when we were in Detroit, being the only one with 2 kids, a lot of the, there were several Indian doctors there working, and many of them were single and all of that. So at the end of the workday, we were all right there among all the hospitals, with the, the apartment being right in the, in the downtown area. They would all walk into my apartment. And they would drink Coke with us and play with my kids, and if I'm cooking something, they would eat. And there were men and women, some of them Parameswaran knew from Madras when he was, working there. Some of them were new to us, a lot of Malayalis and Tamilians and Andhra people and North Indians, whatever, all kinds of, from regions of India. And they would all get together and we would have a good time in the evenings, just chatting and talking and all of that. And looking back, I think that is how we found a comfort zone for each other. I welcomed them. I didn't have trouble, oh, my apartment is dirty, or, when am I going to put my child to sleep because they are all showing up after 5 o'clock. We never thought like that. Parameswaran would come home very tired, but you would be happy to see all these people.
So you welcomed them. In return, you also felt a sense of security and a continuation of the culture.
Yeah, exactly, and they also wanted to come because that's the only way we could find some comfort from each other. What would you do going back to an empty apartment and sitting there after a long day of work? So I tell my children, Ashok and Rajesh, many times that you kept a lot of our friends from getting totally depressed and going, crazy, because you provided a lot of joy to these people. Maybe they reminded them of their own nieces and nephews and things like that. And there were a lot of pediatricians. Another advantage was that even if they had a rash or a little cut, I had 3 doctors waiting on them. So it was overall a good experience. Yes.
So did you face any kind of prejudice or discrimination at that time when you came first to Michigan?
Yes, I cannot think of anything overt like Parameswaran said. Probably there were subtle things because I remember with my long hair, braided and all of that, sometimes there would be people walking on the street and making comments about about my hair or something like that, or my accent, of course. So I'm sure there were little subtle things, but being young and just starting out, it didn't bother me. It made me think, okay, then they are not the only ones with accent. I also have an accent. Maybe I should speak a little more clearly, a little more slowly, and things like that. So, but nothing that hurt me or anything like that, no.
And I heard from Dr. Parameswaran that you moved to Houston so that he could start his own independent practice.
Yes.
So
Yes.
tell me about your experience here. By that time, I suppose your sons were a little older.
Yes.
And you were settling down.
That's right. From Detroit we moved to Flint, where he did his training, and then we moved to this small town, Sandusky, Michigan, where we lived for 2.5 years. And that small town experience was my first foray into this community, the quote-unquote American community. And I learned a lot. I learned about volunteerism in that community. Because I was the only surgeon's wife, they wanted to keep me happy also, because otherwise they didn't want me to be unhappy and move the whole family away from there. So they included me in every one of their activities, bridge clubs, garden clubs. I became part of the volunteer group that revived the curriculum in the schools there, and some of us would get together and go shopping to Saginaw or Flint or Detroit. All these towns were about an hour away and stuff, because we didn't have a mall or anything in that little town. So that honed my skill in driving. I learned to drive on freeways, long distance. They would encourage me and they would say, don't be afraid, don't follow that, Sunday driver, just be bold and go to the left and just zoom, passing. So even those little things like that I learned, and I think it was a very enriching experience. We, like Parameswaran said, we missed them. We almost cried when we left. Parameswaran became a citizen at that time when we were in Sandusky, and they threw a big party for him and they celebrated his citizenship. The whole town celebrated. So that was a good introduction to this
So
this
you were
culture.
really very honored and in that community.
Yes, it's a true America. It's small town America. If I invited my Indian friends from Detroit, some neighbor would bring me a casserole and say, here, you're having guests today, have this as an extra dish. So they taught me about altruism, charity, giving, courage, and taking time for yourself, and enjoy shopping or exercise and things like that, playing bridge, all of that kind of thing. I never learned to play bridge, I've forgotten it. It was very difficult for me. So then from there we moved to Houston in 1981. And the Indian community was growing at the time. And one of the reasons, like my husband said, was the weather. And this is the mecca of medicine. So we thought for him professionally, this would be a wonderful place also. And Houston has been very good to us. When we came, it was very rural. My children, we only thought about school at the time, what would be the good school. And talking to some of the friends who were already in Houston, they all suggested Fort Bend County schools. So we decided, okay, we will settle there because the children cannot compromise on their schooling. And then wherever he would pick up practice, let it be, because this is a big city, not like Sandusky with one hospital. So he ended up driving a lot to Southeast Memorial from Fort Bend. But it was not a big deal for him. It was rural. A lot of the roads were, even in Fort Bend County, a lot of ranches there. Cows would graze. I would take my children and show them cows grazing in those empty spots where now there is a Kroger and Target and things like that. And there are a lot of migrants from the north and northeast to Houston because of the oil boom. So when we would drive, we would see other people with Michigan license plates, and we would honk and wave to each other because the auto industry was going down. Houston was booming. You saw a lot of influx of people from those, from the north. So that was another enjoyable experience. We thought it would be cowboys and Indians, and it wasn't like that. It was people like us moving from the north.
And then you started several initiatives in the Houston area. And one of the most significant things that you have contributed forever, people will be thanking you, it's the starting of Daya. I mean, tell me about how you started. What sparked you into starting such a successful and compassionate?
Thank you very much. I'm glad you brought up Daya. Daya is, as you know, means compassion in Sanskrit, and it is an organization that helps South Asian battered women and children in the greater Houston area. And I'm so proud of it. And I feel privileged that I got the opportunity to start it. I didn't plan, it's not like I had a big vision or anything. It just somehow came my way. And I think some instinctual things, through sheer instinct, I joined, this effort, and I became one of the founders. And it's an organization that is growing by leaps and bounds. But before I talk a little bit more about that, I want to tell you a little bit about, I told you we were in Detroit, and we had good times with other people and all of that, but it was not all good time. Sometimes, many of us didn't work, some of us were working, but many of the wives did not work and would be spending time walking around the apartment, things like that. And because I was also at home with my kids, sometimes other residents in the apartment would knock on my door and say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I live above you, and thought I'll come and say hello, and we would chat and go for walks and things like that. It was very normal. We would, talk to each other and go introduce ourselves. In those days, we would even introduce to someone on the street if it was an Indian person. I'm sure you would have done that too. So like that, there was one girl particularly that she would come and stay with me many days in a week. And she would stay throughout the day. In the evening, I thought she would go home because her husband would be home naturally. And she wouldn't go. She would just stick around in our house till we were ready to go to sleep ourselves. And once in a while, I'd ask her, don't you have to go home? Did you have to have, spend time with your husband? She would say, oh, you know what, he's working, he's moonlighting, this and that, which seemed normal because even Parameswaran moonlighted in Detroit General Hospital. We all needed extra money, things like that. I didn't think anything of it, but after several months of friendship, she confided in me that she's not going home because her husband has a girlfriend, a nurse or somebody, that he would bring her home and they would be spending his free time together in the apartment, and that...
Even when she was there?
Yes. Yeah. So her escape was my home. And she didn't want to go back because what would she do? She would have to sit in the living room and sleep on the sofa. And I would tell her, oh my God, that's horrible. Did you ask him? Did you tell him, this is not right? She said, yes, I confronted him, and his answer is, if you don't like it, you can leave. Where would she go? She's an immigrant like us. She's barely there for a year or two. She was a physician, but she hadn't finished all her exams to work outside.
She was a physician?
Yes, she was a physician, so was he. But she said, I have to take all my exam and I have to find a job. And then he's telling me to go, where will I go? So that's why I'm coming and sitting in your apartment, and it's the first time I'm confiding in you about this, and it was a heartbreaking story, and I would think, my God, if I had some inconvenience, if I felt like, if Parameswaran, for example, didn't want her there all the time, and if I had suggested to her, let's meet next week, not this week, I don't know what she would have done, you see? So that thing was there in me, oh my God, this is a serious situation. We are not all happy-go-lucky people.
So the seed practically was at that time maybe beginning of sprouting. Yes, that sprouted later on into
that,
your idea, vision.
I kind of knew that there has to be something that we have to do, because if I was not here, I didn't have a big ego, but I'm not doing anything for her. I happen to be home. I open the door and tell her, okay, you can stay here. That's all I was doing. But then that's not enough. So probably that seed was there, and then there was an incident in Houston in 1993, I believe, where as a young South Indian girl shot and killed her husband and her 3 young children, and then shot and killed herself. And it became a major news in Houston. The Houston Chronicle did a expose, a Sunday, front page expose on that, that she was going through abuse for over 10 years. She had a job, she could speak English and all of that, but she never confided in anyone. The stigma of domestic violence. And her conclusion was to end it this way. She found no other way. to come out of this situation, that she thought this is the only way to end it. And at that time, we had formed a loose organization. We took training from other women's centers in the area, and we had formed a loose group of liaisoning between the women's centers and the Indian community, by which they would call us if somebody needed help. They would call us. If somebody called the women's center, they would call us to be the bridge, language bridge, cultural bridge. But they never called us. And then this news comes. Then we thought, what we are doing is not enough. We have to start something structured. So several of us Indian American women got together and started Daya. And it was a voluntary thing. I used to take calls in my own home. We have only had a voicemail system. We didn't have a real phone even. And I would spend...
so you took calls in your own home?
Yeah, home number, yes. No cell phone either. This was the 90s still. Remember, cell phones came only later on. So we would pick up the message and call them back and provide them with some support services and things like that. And we stayed very grassroots like that for several years, and now we have an office, 3 full-time staff. We have a home where women can stay up to 6 months and work towards economic independence. And we do a lot of community education and outreach, because the community is a big part of finding a solution to this. It's not enough if we provide counseling and group. The community has to be aware and support the victims in our community and refer them to us and support us through their financial and volunteer contributions. So we do community education and outreach. And this year, for example, we have served close to 300 clients. Last year it was over 300, so I know we will reach that in the next 2 months. And we have over 5,000 phone calls that we have fielded. That is this year. So it was from 20 calls a week at my home.
5,000 calls?
Yes. I mean, not all of them are new clients. The clients call several times. So it translates into about 300 clients. And I'm very proud of that. We have a good group of board members and supporters. And the Indian American community, I must say I'm very proud of them. They support us through their fundraisers and things like that. And that is how we are able to provide the service.
And beyond just Daya, which is a fantastic contribution that you made to the Houston community, you've also gone into writing about the domestic violence and all that too.
Yes, because I have some interest in writing.
I have read your writing.
Thank you.
You are an excellent writer.
I every now and then write for the Houston Chronicle on issues relating to women, South Asian women, cross-cultural issues that come up. And after this murder-suicide that happened, I wrote a letter to the editor, a long letter that was published. And I also wrote, I have this book with me, a chapter on the South Asian domestic violence movement. Daya is not the only organization. There are 25 all over the United States. In different, in each cities like New Jersey, New York, Chicago, Detroit, there are 25. And the earliest of them started in 1983 in New Jersey and Chicago. And Houston, for the 4th largest organization, I would say is a little bit late, because it was 1995 when we started there. In 1996 officially it became a helpline. So there was a movement along with the temples and religion, religious organizations that we started. There was this domestic violence movement in the South Asian community happening. And many people are not aware of the strength of that. This is only to address domestic violence by South Asians for South Asians. So in this book, which was published by the Seal Press, the editors are 2 professors from California, I contributed a chapter on this pioneering moment, which I titled Voices of the Pioneers, the Origin of the South Asian Domestic Violence Movement in the United States. So I just want to bring it to people's attention in case they want to, there's another historical thing that I believe our community needs to know.
Yeah, and this is both in terms of what you are doing as well as for people to access the services.
Yes, and it will be of interest to college students, people who work in this field. This is our contribution. And if there are a lot of talk about domestic violence and all of that now. It wasn't there in the 80s. We were busy building temples and dance schools and then music schools and all of that, which is wonderful. We needed that too. But then, like I said, even in 1973, problems have been there. You see, problems don't go away. Whatever problems we had in India, of course, have followed us here.
And also maybe after you lived in this country for some time, people, Indian, South Asians, we think less about the stigma as we grow into this culture. Is that what you think happened?
The stigma is going away slowly, but there is a lot of stigma.
Still.
Our community has to go a long way. I mean, even in the mainstream community, there is a lot of stigma attached to this. In this country, they didn't address domestic violence until the 60s. And when I moved here in the early 1970s, the women's lib movement was going strong. I don't know if burning bras and things like that, Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan, and they were finding, they were just voicing how, they need equal rights and all of that. And those movements was not, that was a movement by the upper middle white class women for themselves, and I don't think my research tells me that even African American women didn't feel part of that movement. Because as immigrants, as minorities, we have our own issues. What they think is liberation may not be ours, and what they think is cultural, stigma or backward thinking is not ours. For example, we are from a very traditional culture, and we are, we accommodate, and we have strict gender roles and things like that. And sometimes it's good, and we don't think that there is a problem if you accommodate. For example, if you put off your career for your husband's sake and things like that, we take it as normal. At the same time, we also try to exercise our voices. So people would ask me, for example, you asked about prejudice, they'd say, oh, Indian women, some of you, I have seen you, why are you walking 6 feet behind your husband? Number one, I'm a slow walker. Number two, I don't see anything wrong. It's not because I'm behind him in any way. I may not know the route, he's leading the way. So I'm following him. There could be a number of reasons, not because I am emotionally or status-wise inferior to him. But that is the perception there that, that is still there about our countries from South Asia.
And yeah, it's possible that sometimes we don't even think of these things as serious, and it can be.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving from that, also I know besides writing and besides this fantastic Daya, you've also contributed politically also to the Democratic Party. Tell us about that.
My husband became a citizen, I told you, when we were in Sandusky, and the children, when they turned 18, naturally they opted for citizenship. But I held on to my Indian passport till the 1990s. Somehow there was this feeling that we would go back, or we shouldn't, by surrendering the passport, I'm surrendering something bigger. It was a symbolic thing. Like Parameswaran said, we were going to India every year, we still do. And we were comfortable there, and we are also comfortable there. And I don't think, culturally, we have done our part. Parameswaran was part of the Meenakshi temple and things like that. And in fact, in 1981, when we moved to Houston, my in-laws were visiting at the time, Parameswaran's parents. And they, along with the Dr. Appan, who you interviewed some time ago, those two couple laid the foundation stone for our Meenakshi temple as elders. And we are very proud of that and the way our temple has grown. So we are as culturally aware and active as anybody else. But at the same time, the political, because I was not a citizen, I would feel passionate about the issue, and then I'd say, what is the use? I cannot vote anyway. That was my excuse. And even after becoming a citizenship, I think, Clinton presidency, I believe, I don't remember who, or the senior Bush, I was comfortable. There was no complaints for me to go to vote on every issue. But then after 9/11, a change happened within me, yes. Because I saw my son going through the security line where he had to pretty much strip everything, to show that he is not a terrorist, or he is not, a suspect and things like that. And that's because of his color. And at that time, the children, they are growing up, once in a while they would have a beard. All of a sudden they'll show up with a beard, things like that. I would tell them, please shave off your beard. So I thought, oh my God, it's come to this. And the Patriot Act, are we not patriots? You and I, people like us and our husbands, they have contributed a lot to this country. But then all of a sudden we are labeled as, you may not be as patriotic as we want you to be. Then I thought, it's not their fault. They are judging us by the way we look and by the way, it's purely based on outward appearance and what some people have done. Anybody can do horrendous things. It doesn't matter who you are. So I thought, I have to get politically active, and that's when after the first Bush 43 administration, after the 9/11, I worked very hard for the Democratic Party, and when Obama came as a candidate, I saw in him, he symbolized one of our children becoming presidents, a South Asian, because he's the first African American president. If I don't support him, then who would support when down the road after 10 years or 15 years a South Asian child wants to be president? So even though I liked Hillary very much, I thought my allegiance should be for him first. And I worked very hard. I made 4,000 phone calls for him campaigning, in the swing states. I did my part, and I'm glad that he is our president. I know there are a lot of issues in this country that we have to deal with. We don't have time to go into it now. But I'm very glad about it, because now I can see slowly a South Asian president down the road. And so that is my reason for my political activism.
And you were active for the re-election too.
Yes, both the terms. Yes, I was.
Now, coming from your own significant contribution, I know your sons have made their contribution too. They have kind of followed Dr. Parameswaran, your model, and kind of emulated them, maybe not exactly in the profession, but they have their own accomplishments to their credit too. Tell me about it.
Thank you. Our sons are Ashok and Rajesh. They consider Houston to be their home. This is where their growing up years happened. And like Parameswaran was saying, they had other ideas when they were young, because that's all they have seen, their doctor's profession. But when they went to school, my older one, Ashok, decided to become an economist. I'm not surprised. My father was an economic professor. And he worked for the Department of the Treasury at the time of the Bush administration. And when the Pakistan and Afghanistan, the war was going on after 9/11, he was part of the negotiations on behalf of Colin Powell. He went to Pakistan and Afghanistan and things like that. Imagine that, what an experience that was, to be in that thing.
So international finance.
Yeah, he is international finance. So he got the opportunity to do all of that, being in the Treasury for 4 years, and then he quit, and he's in the private sector now. He works for AIG, the insurance company you may have heard of. And he's also very socially and politically active as he can be. They are all, socially conscious people, like they say. But their political, their social, services are more global than. We had to take care of our own community first. We had to build temples and, form groups and, nurture our language and traditions and things like that. And for them now, because of us, they have the luxury to think globally about volunteering and supporting and things like that. And Rajesh, I believe he got the passion for English language, I believe, from my father and through me.
And from you.
Yes, and he did English literature as an undergraduate. He became a lawyer. He studied law also and became a lawyer because he knew we would want him to have a quote-unquote a traditional professional education. But then his heart was in writing. And then after working for a lawyer for some time, for a brief period, he said, I have to pursue my writing. I want to do it when I'm young, not wait till I'm 50-something after working for 20 years. So let me try my hand in it. And if I become successful, I will go for it. If not, I won't be too old to go back to something else. So he spent 7 years writing a book of short fiction. His short stories have appeared in other magazines. So he had some encouragement that way. This work of fiction called I Am an Executioner, love stories, was published 2 years ago. And now he's working on a novel. I don't know much about it. So I think because of the moderate success of the first novel, which was published by Kanaf, one of the top publishers in the country, and he got some fellowships to write his second book because of that first book, I think he'll be a writer.
Okay, he has decided his career.
Yeah.
And you have both been very supportive it may not be our what we focus as traditional job.
Yes, they didn't go into a mainstream traditional career. Yes, you're right, and it is a scary thing. It is scary, and I don't blame other parents who drill in them, okay, do this, do that. It is scary, but you also have to take a bold step sometimes, especially like Parameswaran said, if your child has a passion. It's up to us parents to stoke that and to give them a chance to see where it goes. And if they become successful at it, that's fine. But they let them have a plan B also. But I think we should be risk takers. That's what I think. I'm not saying that we did anything brave. My son was very adamant about what he wanted to do, so we had to give in. But we had our concerns, and he would alleviate our concerns. As a lawyer, he could have made a decent income and all of that. It didn't happen. Only now he's slowly, getting to where he wants to be. So all of that is there. But at the same time, you'll find out how rewarding it is when your child is successful at a non-traditional career. And it gives you immense pride and joy. So I would encourage any parent, and I know we have a lot of talented children in our community. I see that in music and arts and theater. Your daughter herself is an opera singer, I know that. And that is not very mainstream, that's rare, So things like that I think should be encouraged. And as parents, we shouldn't be close-minded about it. Yes.
Now, you have lived for many years in Houston. And Houston, as you said, was very different at the time when you moved here. It has changed a lot. Do you think, I asked this question of your husband too, do you think those years when there were a small number of Indians settling here to now a very, very large number of Indians settling here, do you have any kind of suggestions, guidance, recommendation that you have for these new stream of Indians coming from India? What kind of strategies or ideas for settling here as well as when they are living here that you would suggest?
I don't have anything new. I'm sure a lot of us know what it is. That be brave, be bold, don't lose your goal, be focused. And there are a lot of phrases like this. That would be my general advice. But as I said earlier, I want them to be a little bit risk takers. You see,
a little bit
risk takers.
Risk takers.
Yes. And, starting a domestic violence organization, for example, or doing a bone marrow drive, for example, was not something that other people had thought of at the time. Like that, there are a lot of issues in our community. Like we have depression, old age, illnesses, single parenthood, widow, and there are people who are, widowed in their middle ages and things like that, second marriages. There are a lot of issues that are there that as growing immigrants we are facing. There are children, not only gifted children. I know you know a lot about gifted children as an educator, so do I. But there are also children with disabilities who are not able to make it. They are challenged. We should have a forum for all of these things. We cannot say, my children are doing well. I am volunteering in the temple. I am responsible for developing the in this area because of me there is an additional, a building somewhere or a parking lot. We cannot be. I know those are all comfort zones, and most people like to go into things that are comfortable and that are accepted. And that is fine. You can start with that. But you should also, if there is something inside you that tells you, so many people are doing this. Let me do something different. I have a friend, or I know of this child, or I know of this person with this particular problem. And that person needs a support system. So maybe I have to look into that. If you feel that, just push the envelope and start. And you will find that there will be support, and somebody will thank you for addressing that particular taboo issue that hasn't been addressed. So don't always follow the crowd. That would be my advice to.
So be innovative and
be innovative.
Be a risk taker.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Now, do you feel there are more challenges? Did you feel you had more challenges when settling down because you were kind of a minority, real minority at that time, compared to the people now? There is a very large population. Do they have more challenges? How would you compare that?
You know, we had a lot of challenges because we were the first, set of immigrants to come. And we couldn't use the strategies we learned from our mothers and fathers because that wouldn't work in this situation. But then we had no one to look to and say, hey, how do I handle this problem? You've been here many years, tell me. We didn't have anybody like that. So we had to find our own solutions for our unique issues because we couldn't accept the mainstream people's problem-solving techniques because that didn't fit in with our way of living, our cultural beliefs and values that we didn't want to let go or we couldn't let go. So we couldn't all of a sudden become quote-unquote an American, and say, okay, I can do this because all these other people are doing it. No, we had to do what, that fit in with our cultural norms and beliefs. When then there was nobody for us. So we had to find, we had to innovate many things. Through our dresses, all of us had trouble wearing Western clothes. I know you had it too, and I had it too. It was difficult for me to cut my long hair, which was appreciated in India, slowly, little by little. Because when I go out and wanted to work, by the way, I didn't mention that that I am a family therapist. I went back to school in this country. I'll come to that in a minute. For this generation of people who are coming, even our children's second generation as well as the 1.5 generation and the new immigrants, there is a big support system. We have created a soft place for them to fall back on, which is wonderful. I'm glad we did that for them. But that is also in a way may keep them from stretching out. We have to deal with all kinds of people and all kinds of situations. We have to join, like when we were in the small town, we would join Thanksgiving and Christmas with them. Diwali and all of that was not. Sometimes I wouldn't even know when Diwali was because there were not many of us. It would fall on a weekday. How do you celebrate? But now look at the Dasara celebration, Diwali celebration in Houston alone. Fantastic. We cannot miss it. All of that is great. So they can do. But I would think that doesn't mean you cannot celebrate other holidays with your other neighbors. Go volunteer in the like for example the homeless shelters and the other forums where they volunteer, not just the comfort zones where you feel comfortable with. Take up an issue. Americans are charitable, as I mentioned, and they take care of all kinds of people. So stretch yourself out, talk to other people in your neighborhood and your workplace. Don't just go to work and come back and get back into your mini India.
That's true. Now, you need to talk about the fact that you went to do graduate work in family therapy.
Yes, I did. When I first came in Michigan, because my children were small and Parameswaran was as a resident, it was 48-hour call routine. He would only come home every other night to sleep. That's how he worked. At that time, it was like that for residents. Now I think it has changed a little bit. So I was, I had to be available for my kids. So even though, and at that time we thought we would go back in 3 years. And that didn't happen. So my thinking was to do something that would fit in even if I went back. Even then we hoped that we would go back. I told you, I didn't surrender my passport for a long time. So I thought early childhood education would be good because in India, these daycares or what they call crutches were coming up for people to leave their children and go to work because there were a lot of two-income families. It was becoming more more acceptable in India also. So I went back to early childhood education studies in Flint. And that didn't fit in with my children's schedule because they were in preschool and things like that. And I thought because I didn't have anybody to ask question about rearing children, I thought, okay, this would also help me in rearing my own children. I couldn't, now there is Vonage, people can pick up and say, the child is not sleeping or she has a temperature, what do I do? And immediately your father and mother is there to direct you, we couldn't do that, So I studied early childhood education and I thought it would help me personally. It did. And I also worked in daycare, and after I moved to Houston, I did a lot of substitute teaching. For the first few years, I told my in-laws were here and we bought a house, and I was really getting used to the life in Houston that I substitute taught in Fort Bend schools, and I didn't take up anything. Then my goal was, once my children were older and were ready to leave, I wanted to go back to teach. So I went to University of Houston, Clear Lake, and looked at the curriculum. Family therapy course and master's level family therapy course attracted me. I thought, this is what I need. Probably won't help me much at this time, but it went back to my experience with my friends in Detroit and other experiences I've had throughout my life with friends who are going through a lot of problems. Everybody didn't have this model minority life, that we all are very proud of. There were difficult marriages. People didn't have jobs. Some of the engineers, had to work in, as attendants and things like that. Like some of us know, even doctors were not getting, unless you pass all the exams and things like that. Many of the doctors were working as orderlies. So all of these things were there. It was not all rosy. So I thought a master's in family therapy would somehow allow me to help our communities to cope with a lot of the problems. So that's what I did in the early 90s, that I finished my course in family therapy, and I worked at Fort Bend County Women's Center as an outreach director. And that's when I found out, Fort Bend County being the largest county, one of the largest counties, where a lot of Asians also are migrating, Fort Bend, in the Women's Center, which deals with domestic violence issues, not one South Asian has called. That was in the early 90s that I discovered that. And it sounded very strange to me that nobody would have a problem with domestic violence or some. So that's another reason why when Daya's idea came up, I just took it. Because my career was already getting established, helping domestic violence victims. I was a counselor with a license. So I thought, okay, if we do this through Daya for the South Asian community, then
So you were able to blend it.
Blend it, and I could serve my community as well.
Thank you. Now, looks like your husband, Dr. Parameswaran, is
Okay,
joining us.
great. Okay, so
I have had the great pleasure of talking to Lakshmi, and I am simply amazed by the phenomenal contribution, not just in your professional fields, not just in therapy, not just in medicine, but beyond just the narrow field of specialty you have contributed. I think you have truly enriched the Houston community, and in a way America. They say America enriches everybody, but you have truly enriched America.
thank you, Padmaja.
So,
You are very kind to praise us so lavishly.
It's not just
but
like
this
this.
is to take that
Yes.
risk, and at the same time it's not just taking risk, it's being innovative and trying things where no other person has tried. That requires courage
Thank you.
and also creativity. And
there are a
you
lot
have
of
been
people.
both blessed.
Thank
Now,
you. Thank you.
as parting words, what are your great statements for the future Indian community as well as our younger generation that we have raised?
I think we've said a lot of things throughout, and where we have said our wishes and hopes and suggestions for the community, like do the best you can and contribute to your own ethnic community and definitely to the larger community, because this is the community that has nurtured us, and this is where our children and grandchildren are going to live and call it home. So we have said that, and we also want to say how proud we are of our first generation immigrant group that have crossed this ocean, not literally. We crossed the ocean. We also crossed the ocean, figuratively too. We have come from a very traditional background, where we had to write letters in those days and wait for a whole day to make a phone call to India, to now Skype and Vonage and, and texting and emailing, where we can communicate instantly and show off our homes and our other treasures and grandchildren, communicating through Skype. So we have figuratively crossed, a long barrier, right? We've come a long way, and that is, that we are very proud of how all of us, not just us, all of us have accommodated to this great leap.
Yes, and
In
you
many
have,
ways, we have made great leap, and all of us should be proud of.
both of you have indeed made a great leap forward, and forever I think the future generations will be thankful to you for what you did.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lakshmi Parameswaran and Dr. Parameswaran.
Thank you,
It was
Padmaja. I
indeed a
just want to add that
privilege
you
for
too
me.
have contributed a lot to this community.
Yes.
Thank you.
I also want to thank Mr. Krishna Vavilala.
Yeah, right.
Yes,
And who is,
for making
yeah,
this
who is
happen.
spearheading
This
this
happened.
this wonderful project.
Taking this initiative and
I
going
hope
through all
it's a very important project. We wish him all the best for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.